got to stop looking at the world like it's a baseball game and we're on the sidelines. We have to understand that those people who are fighting on the front lines in Syria, in Palestine, in Ukraine, in the Donbass of Ukraine, I mean, those people are fighting the same class enemy that we have. They're fighting the imperialists. They're fighting the same people who impoverish us at home here and push us down and destroy our livelihoods and our lives and our communities. We have a joint fight against the same enemy. And our job, the best way we can help those who are suffering at the sharp end every day under the bombs of NATO, is to organize resistance and rebellion here at home. We have to organize to bring down the imperialist ruling class and its state machinery and its military machinery and its looting machinery, which sucks the wealth of the world out of, the whole planet in order to enrich the teeny tiny class of parasites who are also leeching off of us here. So this is really our job, Nick. We have to organize for socialism.
And I want to ask you about the work that you're currently doing, what the left should be pursuing right now, because I'm seeing a lot of people being head faked by Bernie once again in the United States. Just so to get started, please share a little bit about the work you're doing and the legacy that you continue to carry.
Thank you. Well, the work we do now is the same work that my father was doing for 60 years. And there's a reason for that. It's because although a lot of the surface detail seems to be changing all the time, and we now live in this world of, so many news sources 24 hours a day pumping information at you and making you feel like you've got to keep up. And of course, you can't keep up with it all. And feel like you've got to respond to every change in the surface phenomenon. The reality is that underneath all of that noise, the situation remains the same. The situation we're in is that we are in a stage of decaying imperialism. But the era we're in is the era of the social revolution of the proletariat. Lenin pointed this out all the way back in 1916. He said, imperialism is the eve of the social revolution of the proletariat. What does that mean? It means that when capitalism goes global, all its contradictions go global. And when the capitalist contradictions go global, they get more and more and more glaring, absurd, obscene, impossible to handle for the masses of the world. And they force the working people to revolution as the only solution to their problems. And this is the era we have actually been living in ever since the 1917 October Revolution in Russia. History, we've seen some ups and downs in this revolutionary history, this period, this big epoch in which we're living. But it remains the case that that's the period that we live in. And our job is to build the forces that will successfully bring socialism in whichever country we live. Now, of course, you and I live in the imperialist heartlands.
Yes.
So we have a very particular role because imperialism can be defeated in different places in the oppressed world. It can be kicked out of a colony here, a colony there. There can be liberated territories, and there have been big liberated territories, bigger and smaller at different times. But right now in the world, there are big liberated territories in the world from imperialist control and domination. But the imperialist system as a whole will not fall purely as a result of the anti-colonial struggle abroad. It has to be smashed at home. That's our job. That's our job. And we have to keep our eyes on that prize, Nick, that we, the working class in the imperialist countries, no matter how difficult the job, no matter how fast asleep a lot of our fellow workers seem to be, no matter how despondent a lot of people feel, because it seems that the imperialist class is just so powerful, so rich, so able to buy off so many people. Nevertheless, its contradictions are driving it into crisis and into a ditch from which it cannot escape except for at our expense, at the expense of the masses in the oppressed world, but also at the expense of the workers at home. And that's what we're experiencing right now, isn't it? Living standards are being pushed down at home, bloodbaths are being engendered abroad, all for the same reason. Because the imperialist economy, the global capitalist economy, is in a very deep crisis, and it's getting worse. And the imperialists are actually desperate. They're facing ruin and bankruptcy, and they're looking for paydays. And their payday comes by finding a way to loot the treasury at home, or to push down the pay and conditions of workers at home just a bit more, to privatize something else at home and loot it for all they're worth. And their paydays come by breaking apart and looting big territories abroad. If you look at the successful destruction of Yugoslavia by the imperialists back in through the 90s, really, but culminating with the Yugoslav War, 1999, what did they do to Yugoslavia in order to loot it and break its sovereignty? Broke it into tiny pieces with little comprador ruling classes all fighting one another and filling the heads of the people in each territory with some kind of, pernicious national, fratricidal ideology that tells them their people that they've been living with for the last 50 years, their neighbors, friends and brothers, are now their enemies, right? Get them all fighting one another in little pots, so you can keep them down, you can control them, and you can loot them. This is the plan imperialism has for every single country that stands up to it. Look what they did to Iraq. As soon as the Iraq invasion happened, they started talking about Iraq, not as Iraq, and Iraqis not as Iraqis, but as the northern region with Kurds, the central Sunni region, and the southern Shia region. And they even have different areas of occupation between the Americans and the British to emphasize this. What they were doing was projecting their plan. They were telling us, we want to break Iraq into 3 pieces. And this is we're telling you a story that tries to justify doing this. Oh, they're 3 different people, actually. They're not all Iraqis. They're 3 different people. Look what they're doing in Syria right now. They're constantly telling us a story about Druze and Alawite and Shia and Sunni. And, this is a nonsense. This is an absolute nonsense. This is a projection to justify their plan to balkanize Syria and control it that way. This has nothing to do with the Syrian people. It's their needs, their desires, their wishes, everything to do with imperialist aims. Why? Because Syria was a bulwark of anti-Zionist, anti-imperialist resistance in the Middle East ever since the 1940s. Syria was the strongest state of support for the longest period of time for Palestine, against Zionism. Syria consistently refused to normalize relations with Israel. It's part of the reason the governments there became termed by people locally as dictators. Why? Because they had to defend themselves against constant Zionist onslaught. And so they ended up having to have a very heavy police and secret services machinery because of the constant Zionist infiltration. They were awash with Zionist spies and saboteurs, but they kept an economy and a country that was really quite pro-people. In fact, they built up their own, they were sovereign. They built up their own industry, their own arms industries, their own, general industries, their own farming. They had a whole load of things that, and a separate monetary system. They had a whole load of things going on that gave them sovereignty, and that the imperialists have now been at pains to very rapidly dismantle and destroy as much as possible. On the first day after Damascus fell, Israeli planes were in bombing the industry of Syria to make sure that it would be very hard for Syria to rise again very quickly. But, they're not going to keep the people down there, forever. Now, sorry, to come back to your question, I went on off a side one there. To come back to your question, what should the left be doing? Our job here is to help the workers understand that we are in this fight. We've got to not look at the world like it's a kind of geopolitical baseball game where we hope that other people are going to save us from all the horrors. Maybe Xi Jinping is going to do it. Maybe Vladimir Putin's going to do it. Maybe Donald Trump's going to do it. I know a lot of people are hoping that it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. But, we got to stop looking at the world like it's a baseball game and we're on the sidelines. We have to understand that those people who are fighting on the front lines in Syria, in Palestine, in Ukraine, in the Donbass of Ukraine, I mean, those people are fighting the same class enemy that we have. They're fighting the imperialists. They're fighting the same people who impoverish us at home here and push us down and destroy our livelihoods and our lives and our communities. We have a joint fight against the same enemy. And our job, the best way we can help those who are suffering at the sharp end every day under the bombs of NATO, is to organize resistance and rebellion here at home. We have to organize to bring down the imperialist ruling class and its state machinery and its military machinery and its looting machinery, which sucks the wealth of the world out of, the whole planet in order to enrich the teeny tiny class of parasites who are also leeching off of us here. So this is really our job, Nick. We have to organize for socialism, right? And that means bringing together working people and helping them to understand that they have a shared interest in fighting for socialism, which is actually going to deliver them the things that they need, prosperity, peace, development, a life of meaning, and also a life of security and peace.
Yeah, that was one of the great opening monologues in RBN history. Very thoughtful, and there's so much I want to add to that because you make me feel much better. Because I know I have been focusing a lot on the genocide going on in Gaza. I've been covering Syria a lot, the expansionist wars of NATO, and how the Ukrainian working class was destroyed because of the decisions of the West. And I was talking to my RBN friends, like, man, maybe I need to start looking at more domestic issues. But you guys have to understand that opposing empire, as you said, Jody, like we have to embrace the role of being the enemy from within. And especially regarding the Palestine conflict, I mentioned this many times before. I take the correct position of standing for a one-state solution, the end of apartheid, because I know a lot of my Palestinian brothers and sisters can't. It's our job to being people who live within the empire to advocate for the correct positions on behalf of our brothers and sisters who would be retaliated against otherwise. That's why they gotta be tepid. That's why they gotta dance. I support two-state solution, because if they don't, they will be labeled terrorists. You guys see what they're doing in the United States campuses and universities. We're gonna cover how Donald Trump is implementing a historic free speech crackdown. But imposing imperialism, especially in this time we're in right now, where even the quote unquote left flanks of the imperialist wings are endorsing never-ending war. You organize in the UK, and the UK, like the Labour Party and the left parties, and I use left very loosely, just we can always have a conversation what that really means, but just very loosely, the left liberal class, and not just in the UK, but in the entirety of Europe, have completely lost their mind. We are seeing free speech completely non-existent in countries like Germany and the UK when it comes to resisting the state of Israel. So I want you to speak more on that, on how the Green parties all across Europe have been captured by the NATO war machine, and why there's so many people who call themselves social democrats end up actually doing the bidding of U.S. imperialism and UK and European imperialism as well, which fall under that umbrella. But Jody, do you want to take that on?
Sure. Just to pick up your very last point there, social democracy is a political trend in the imperialist countries. And again, Lenin exposed it, and my father wrote a very good book on it as well, Social Democracy, The Enemy Within, explaining that social democracy relies for the small bribe that it achieves for a section of the working class, relies on imperialism and imperialist super profits. So the reason that social democrats who pretend that they're on the side of the workers and that they want nice things for the working class always end up supporting imperialist war is that the imperialist looting machine is the source of the bribe that they get and that they pay to a section of the working class, but not the whole working class, but a section that Lenin called the labor aristocracy. Right now, in the post-World War II situation, because revolution was knocking at the door all across Europe, there was a massive social bribe paid through the blood of the colonial peoples, we have to emphasize, but a massive social bribe was paid, and not just a small layer of the working class, but almost the entire working class got lifted up during that period. What also happened at the same time was that the communist parties basically adopted social democratic programs, put themselves to sleep, and put the working class to sleep, like the class struggle was now over because we've had a bit of a bribe. And of course, what happened? As soon as the post-war boom was over, the ruling class, having successfully dismantled the militant opposition to their rule, started to come for all the gains they've made and undo them. And they have faced almost no opposition. The last meaningful opposition in Britain was the Great Miners' Strike, which is now 40 years ago. That was the last big defeat of organized labor in Britain. And since then, all the attacks on the working class have been carried out with absolutely minimal opposition. And those who have stood up and said that they're leading opposition have all been under the control of the ruling class in one way or another, tied to the Labour Party, which itself is tied to imperialism. So you have these misleaders of the mass movement who always end up channeling opposition of workers back under the control of the very party. You know, Labour Party was the one that was in power when the Iraq and Afghan wars were launched. And it was people tied to the Labour Party who were in charge of the anti-war movement. And we ask ourselves why the anti-war movement in Britain never stopped a war. You know, against the Iraq war, we had 2 million people on the street. Imagine a genuine anti-war leadership, what they could have done with that. I mean, you could have closed down Whitehall, closed down all the bases around London, you know, occupied Parliament, occupied the City of London. You could have done all kinds of things. There's no way that, you know, the British police force is big enough to control 2 million people if they're determined and they're given the right directions. But what were they told, those 2 million people? Wow, this is the biggest demonstration ever in British history. You're all amazing, brilliant, well done. See you next time. And the Stop the War leadership 20 years later, they're still dining out on that story that they organized the biggest, they didn't actually organize it, but, you know, the biggest demonstration ever. It's like, did we just demonstrate to, you know, keep our feet busy? We were there because we wanted to stop the war. And actually the message that a whole load of workers who went on those demonstrations got from that experience was, there's no point trying. Because look how hard we tried. So many people really believed in those days that they could, if there enough of them came on the streets, it would change the government's mind. Surely they'll listen to us. Well, 20 years of experience has shown it made a lot of people very, very cynical. But what it hasn't done is help them to understand why their organized movement keeps failing. Why do the trade unions never win a struggle? Why does the anti-war movement never stop a war? Why does the Palestine solidarity movement not deliver genuine solidarity to Palestine? What is it that's wrong with this leadership? And, you know, it's communists that were needed to explain this, to deliver the education necessary to understand what is imperialism, what is capitalism, what is social democracy, what is it we need to do to get past this apparent impasse and actually become agents again in our own story. You know, ultimately, it's the masses who are the motive force in history, but we have to be educated in order to use the power that we have.